Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about one of my favourite tanks, even if it is ludicrous and ridiculous. The German King Tiger. We're not going to do the actual Tiger yet, simply because, well, not the actual Tiger, the Tiger 1 yet, simply because that requires far more research than the Tiger 2 does. The Tiger 2 is actually a rather basic vehicle to try and research. But yes, so the German Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausf B is also gone by several other names. It's known as either the Tiger B, the Königstiger, the King Tiger, or even the Royal Tiger. I'm going to be using a lot of those names sort of just intertwined, just because it's easier than trying to just fixate on one name. So, development of the King Tiger itself begins almost as soon as the Tiger 1 has entered production. The aim of the Tiger 2 is to upgrade the Tiger 1 and fix a lot of the issues which the first vehicle had. This is mostly to do with things like the hull, the reliability issues, and the fact that despite the fact that the Tiger 1 was a bit of a surprise to a lot of the Allied nations, it is now becoming more vulnerable than ever. So the contract is initially given out to two companies to build hulls, transmissions, suspensions, and automotive features for the new vehicle. A turret and armament have already been chosen, and the Krupp company is already in the process of building those. Henschel and Porsche are the two companies which are given contracts to build this new machine. These two works on the first Tiger project, and it's believed that, hey, if these two works on the first one, they will have experience that will help them in building the second vehicle. So the Henschel company plans to simply take what it had from the Tiger 1 project, the project that it won, and simply take them forward with tweaking a few things here and there they weren't happy with. So they designed to add new features and improve their initial design. They designed that they're going to make sloped armour, they're going to make the vehicle slightly bigger for more space, and they're going to simply increase the suspension and the drive system. So the suspension they use is the same torsion bar design that was used by the Tiger 1. It uses 9 steel-tired 80cm diameter overlapping road wheels per side with internal springs, and they do everything that was done on the Tiger 1, but they do take a key part out. They get rid of the interleaving rubber-rimmed road wheels. This is done primarily because mainly because of maintenance reasons. If you're trying to take apart a tank in a war zone, you don't want to have to try and take apart so many bits. If you can simplify the maintenance process, that makes things a hell of a lot easier. It's also, however, probably because the Germans at this point didn't have a hell of a lot of quality rubber going around. The ones that they were making, they were being made in their terrible foundries, which meant that the rubber quality was low. And it's a known fact that by 1944, German Tiger 1s are suffering heavily from poor rubber, and their rubber road wheels are just wearing out after constant use. So their design is relatively simple, and they sort of get that done rather quickly. The Porsche design, by comparison, is bizarre, to say the least. Porsche himself decides that he's going to mount the turret in the rear and use a mid-mounted engine whilst taking the suspension from the Elephant tank destroyer. This has 6 road wheels per side mounted in a pair of bogie springs. Essentially, this uses the same design process that was used in the Tiger P. Basically, the gasoline engine runs an electrical drive, which then powers a pair of batteries, which then powers a generator, which then makes the thing move. This is really complex, and it's overly engineered. It's the reason why Ferdinand Porsche lost the Tiger P project, and he is so convinced, however, that this is going to work that he continues to use it. So he believes that he can make it work, and thus he loses the contract, effectively. The same idea that didn't win him the Tiger project, that had made the Elephant so unpopular, he tries to make it work a third time, doesn't work. The design really never gets going. So Henschel is ordered to begin construction almost immediately as soon as tests are done, mainly because the Porsche design is, again, just so terrible there's no point in even trying to test it. Fortunately, however, Porsche doesn't waste time by building 90 hulls. He just gives it up and begins work immediately on the Mouse project. Lovely. It is at this point that we now need to talk about the turrets. So, with the hull having been picked, the turrets are being put on them. There are 2 turrets that are built. Many of the turrets are referred to simply as the Porsche turret. The first turret is known as the Porsche turret. It's not a Porsche turret. Both turrets are built by Krupp. The first 50 turrets of the prototype design are called Porsche turrets because they're put on but then are almost immediately gotten rid of. This is because they were overly engineered. The slopes, the commander's cupola being awkward, the frontal sloping armour, it's all really hard to mass manufacture, and the Germans do not like it, and they order Krupp to change it. The name, however, comes from the fact that this is tied quite heavily to being a prototype failure, and because they call it the P variant, or the prototype variant, it gets lobbed in with the, oh, this is part of Porsche's design, this is a Porsche designed turret. No, that's not the case. This was designed by Henschel, and it was a prototype design. The other thing that should be noted about the turret, though, is, oh my days, look at the enormous shock trap on this thing. For those of you who are unaware of what a shock trap is when a piece of armour will deflect around, and most likely the round will deflect and go somewhere where it shouldn't go. So in the Tiger's case, if you look at the undersloping of the Porsche, not the Porsche turret, the prototype turret design, the undersloping means if a round hits there and deflects downwards, it's going to go into the hull, where the driver, the co-driver, and the ammunition are all stored. It's basically you asking to get yourself knocked out. Krupp then has to turn around and bring out a new turret design, and it gets it done relatively quickly. It has one developed in a number of months, and by December 1943, they bring back a new turret which is rather simple. It's got simple flat faces which are much better armoured and are much bigger. It also means that the tank can store more ammunition. The turrets were designed to mount the 88mm KWK-43 L71 gun. Now this is a longer version of the gun that is put on the first Tiger. It is longer, it is more accurate, it can shoot far farther, it is deadly. They then combine this with a turret telescopic sight 9D, or a Termsier Fenor 9D, very, very complicated, designed by the Leinz company. This basically turns the Tiger into a sniper. It puts the most accurate long-barreled gun of the war and gives it a telescopic sight that can not only reach the distances that the gun can do, but can accurately reach them constantly. During practice and testing, they ordered the Tigers to fire a target that was 2 meters high by 2.5 meters wide at 1,000 meters. At 1,000 meters, with the first shot, the hit rate was 100%. This fell to 95% at 1,500 meters and 85% at 2,000 meters. Now, we must take that with a grain of salt, given that is in very favourable combat conditions. Or not even combat conditions, it's just favourable testing. But even so, in combat, it is estimated that at 1,000 meters, it only dropped to 80% with the first time shot, which meant that even if the first shot misses, the second shot is always going to hit. You know, the gun is so damn accurate, and the sights are so brilliant on it, that this thing can hit targets reliably at over 2 kilometers away. And even once it hits those targets, the standard Panzergranate 3943 projectile can penetrate up to 132 millimeters of armour at a 30-degree angle. At 2,000 meters, this thing will hit a Sherman, go through a Sherman, and bury itself in the engine. That's how ludicrous this gun was. If you want to up that even more, you put the Panzergranate 4043 ammunition, which is the APCR projectile. That thing will go through a Churchill's frontal armour at 2,000 meters. It's a ridiculously powerful weapon system. To protect this gun and the crew and other parts of the vehicle, it is protected by 150 millimeters of sloped armour at a 45-degree angle on the upper plate. The same degree of protection with 100 millimeters of thickness comprises the lower plate. The sides and the rear are protected by 80mm of armour. The turret front on the production model is 180mm on the front and 80 on the side and rear. The prototype version only has 100mm on the front, but still has 80 on the side and rear. Just to put something in a little bit of context, this means that a Sherman engaging the Tiger II at 500 meters wouldn't be able to, with a 75mm gun, wouldn't be able to penetrate the side armor from about 500 meters. It'd have to get within 100 meters in order to even get close to penetrating the side armor. That's how well armored this machine was. The turrets themselves are power driven. They're powered by a Bornholm Sturm L4S hydraulic motor. This itself is driven from the main engine by a secondary shaft. The gunner has the ability to turn up or down the amount of power he wants running from the hydraulic motor to the turret traverse, meaning that he can adjust how quickly he wants it turned. He can have it as low as 6 degrees per second, meaning that he can make fine adjustments. He can have it set to standard, which is about 19 degrees per second, which was about the same as what the Tiger I was doing. If he puts it into max output, he can have the gun traversing at 36 degrees per second for rapid and really quick changes. The rotation is done using a pair of pedals at the gunner's feet. He then also has the ability to turn it right down and then use light taps of these pedals to make very minor adjustments. Basically meaning that he can gun layer the vehicle using these minor taps. This gives the Tiger II an absolutely ridiculous advantage over any of its contemporaries. The M4 Sherman and the T-34 both have the issue of, once you've got that gun pointed in the right direction, using foot pedals, which they did have, they then have to lay the gun onto the target, however, very accurately, using hand cranks, which takes time. Later versions of the Sherman were able to remove this, but the T-34 nearly always had this problem. Because the turret didn't need to be done by a hand crank, the Germans could gun lay their targets so much quicker. It allowed them to simply swing the turret, make minor adjustments with the feet, and fire. It was an absolutely phenomenally effective system and wouldn't be matched till post-war. Now, the problem is the engine. The engine itself is the 700 PS V12 Maybach HL230 P30 engine, which produces 690 horsepower. This is the same engine that was in the Tiger I and the Panther, and everybody knows how ridiculously unreliable the engine was in those two. The engine is never designed to move a machine of this size. It was never built to move something as heavy as the Panther, never, let alone a Tiger I or a Tiger II. The vehicle was so underpowered that the engines tended to burn themselves out. This also meant that the vehicles tended to be not only mechanically unreliable, but it also threatened to affect the gun and the turret handling. Unfortunately, the turrets could still be operated without the engine because the hydraulic motor could still operate by itself for a short degree of time, but you'd want to get that engine up and running as quickly as you could. The other issue with it being so underpowered is that it used to consume fuel at a ridiculous rate. The main tanks were 860 litre or 180 gallons of fuel. This meant that when operating on roads, the tanks would run out of gas after about 190 kilometres or 120 miles. That's operating on road, by the way. We're not even talking about operating on, the rough terrain of the Spring Germany of 1945, or in the poor infrastructure of the Eastern Front. This is just on a road. This is just how awful it could be. One of the big positives about the King Tiger's mobility, however, was its gearbox and transmission. The Maybach OLVAR OG401216 Model B transmission gave the tank a total of 12 gears, 8 going forward and 4 in reverse. However, all these are then immediately offset by the fact that the steering gear was terrible. It was a double radius design, which meant it was prone to failures. Which meant that despite this awesome reverse speed, which meant that you could get in and out of trouble relatively quickly, the steering gear would nearly almost break down. This, combined with the terrible power and the fuel consumption, meant that all of the advantages you get from the turret and the armament are completely set off because the chassis was just so bad. The tracks themselves come in two sets. You have a transport set and you have what they call a battle set. The transport tracks are designed for rail movement. They're designed to be a lot thinner, designed to fit on railway carriages, and just mean that the tank can be driven from small distances, basically off the wagon and onto a platform where they can then have their tracks exchanged out for battle tracks by the crews. This is, however, where some advantages come back in. The battle tracks were enormously wide. They were designed to reduce the ground pressure of the Tiger as much as possible. The ground pressure of a King Tiger was 10.8 psi. Now I'm no bloody physicist, and I don't really get the whole understanding of psi. I'm not 100% up to scratch with it, but I will do a swift comparison just to give you an idea about how good this was. A mid-war M4A3 Sherman, which is what the Americans were using in Normandy, had a ground pressure of 13.7 psi. This meant that the ground pressure of a King Tiger was less than that of a Sherman, despite weighing twice as much. I am not a physicist, but I can tell you categorically that's good. Just to put it into some context, there is an example that is drawn by Lieutenant Colonel H.A. Shields of the 66th Armoured Regiment in 1945 near Puttendorf. He says that the Tigers and the Panthers didn't have any inferior in manoeuvrability. They were never inferior in terms of their manoeuvrability. Near Puttendorf in Germany, several Royal Tigers were encountered and drove across soft ground that Shermans couldn't get across because they would sink in. This is how the Tiger was able to prevent itself from getting bogged down all the time. It had a lot of ground pressure. It had very little ground pressure, should I say. It was able to spread its weight so effectively that it could prevent itself from becoming bogged down all the time. A production order for King Tigers was placed by the German government, with 1,500 vehicles being ordered. This was slightly more than the, at that point, 1,347 Tiger ones that had been produced. The new tanks would be designed to replace the tanks in service and then also replace combat casualties which had been suffered. Heavy Panzer battalions suffered incredible losses. The new tanks would be designed to start production in the summer of 1944, with production of the Tiger 1 ceasing. But in September and October of 1944, the Henshaw plant gets hit by about 2 weeks of consecutive bombing raids which just flatten the floor. It also leads to the destruction of 657 Tiger IIs, which are at various set stages of production. This means that in the end, only 492 vehicles will ever be manufactured. Full production would run from mid-1944, but vehicles would be produced at various stages, starting as early as 1943, but mid-44 is when they get a real production. The Germans would continually propose upgrades to the vehicles. New engines and new gearboxes would be ideated. Krupp tried to put a 105mm KWK L68 gun in it, but this idea was turned down because the German army hadn't even approved the weapon before Krupp started trying to put it where it shouldn't. Attempts to add stabilizers to the main gun and to the sights, and even an auto-loading system was proposed, but none of these ever got off the ground. The closest one was the Krupp proposal, and even that fell through the floor relatively quickly. King Tigers were almost exclusively assigned to heavy tank battalions for combat roles. The only exceptions were 5 machines that were attached to the Panzer-Lehr division for its operations in Normandy, but all of these vehicles would be abandoned by their crews and destroyed before they ever saw combat. They just broke down and were just blown up by their own crews to prevent capture. So, on the screen now should be a layout of what a heavy panzer battalion is. This is meant to comprise 45 vehicles. You're meant to have a battalion command with 3 Tigers, which are meant to look over each company. Then you have each company commander. These are 2 Tigers, which has the first in command and his second in command should the first in command be wounded or killed. Each company has a command over 12 Tigers. This means that each company therefore should have 14 Tigers in total, and there are 3 company commands. It's important to note, however, that this system was nearly never met, mostly because of wartime losses. Heavy Panzer battalions suffered absolutely incredible losses because they were thrown in to try and solve situations which were never going to be able to be solved with. As a result, Tiger IIs were nearly never assigned as a whole to battalions. You would have a company here of Tiger IIs, and then the 2 other companies would be made of Tiger Is, or as the war got on, they would replace Tigers with other Panzers. So, for example, you might look at a 3rd company, and the 3rd company command might have his 1st platoon made up of Tigers, his 2nd platoon might be a mix of tanks including Tigers and Panthers, and his 3rd platoon might be entirely Panzers or Panthers, because that's all they can get their hands on. So the first use of King Tigers in operations was by the 1st company of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion. Again, I'm literally giving you the perfect example here. 1st company has King Tigers, the other 2 companies are standard Tigers. This is the 503rd in Normandy. They would be thrown in the face of the Canadian Operation Atlantic and would go into action between the villages of Thrun and Demoville in July 18th of 1944. They would help to effectively prevent the Canadian breakthrough, but this is mostly because the Canadians didn't put everything behind it. 2 tanks would be lost in action against the Canadians, whilst the commander would drive his tank into a bomb crater and then become stuck. There were no active reports of King Tigers being penetrated via frontal shots in Normandy. Even 17-pounders had no real fun against them, and even when the Americans introduced the 90mm projectiles for their Jacksons, there is no account. It's also important to note, however, that King Tigers played a really minor role in Normandy. The idea of tiger phobia has been talked up, or big cat phobia has been talked up a lot, and King Tigers helped play a really big part in that. They did often get confused for Panthers, however, which never really tended to help their situation much. I remember reading one particular account in which a tank commander reportedly heard an account from his infantry that there was a Panther advancing down the road. He went to intercept, only to encounter that it was not a Panther, it was this great big behemoth King Tiger that was just wallowing around this tiny Normandy village. On the Eastern Front, the Tiger IIs would first be used by the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion in August of 1944. They would attempt to resist the Soviet Lvov-Sandurst offensive. The 501st did not have the greatest time against the Soviets. They would lose 14 Tigers in 3 days, including 3 captured. They would also suffer huge ammunition detonations, which led to the order being that King Tiger could no longer store ammunition in the turrets. This was still largely ignored by their crews, who would at least store some ammunition in the turret to improve the reload speed. King Tigers of the 503rd would then play a critical role during Operation Panzerfaust, which was Otto Skorzény's overthrow of the Hungarian government to ensure its loyalty to Germany until the end of the war. You can imagine the Hungarian government and the Hungarian troops trying to desperately resist and hold parts of their capital as King Tigers start rolling down the streets, and the best thing they have is this little dinky 75mm anti-tank gun. It didn't go well. After this, they would play a really big role in the German victory at Debrecen in October of 1944, destroying 121 Soviet tanks, 244 anti-tank guns and artillery pieces, and a train of all things, losing 25 King Tigers in return. Debrecen is a tactical victory for the Germans, but it doesn't play a big role in the grander strategic output of the war. The biggest success for Tigers would be in the hands of the 103rd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion between January and April of 1945. The 103rd would fight from the banks of the Oder River into Berlin itself and would, it claims, destroy 500 vehicles before folding as part of Kampfgruppe Monke inside Berlin on the 2nd of May. Some members did choose suicide rather than surrender. They were fanatical after all. But they would really outdo themselves inside Berlin. They would just fight on and would just try and hold for as long as they could. The largest use of King Tigers was during the Ardennes offensive, in which at least 150 King Tigers were deployed in 4 heavy panzer battalions parcelled out to the various army groups. Most would be lost in the offensive due to mechanical, fuel or stiff Allied resistance, and would just prove a complete waste of resources. There are multiple examples of King Tiger still left around the world. You have 2 at the Tank Museum in Bovington. There is one at the Defence Academy in Shrivingham. You've got one at the Wheatcroft Collection in Leicestershire. There's one in Germany. There's 2 in France. There's one in Russia. There's one in Belgium, and there's a couple in America, I believe. So, yeah, if you want to go and find one, they're pretty much available in most places, in most big tank museums. And I couldn't recommend going and seeing these things enough, because you look at these things and you realise just how enormous they are. Well, thank you very much for watching today's episode. Thank you very much for all the support on the channel. I'd also like to thank the huge number of subscribers that continue to contribute every day. If you think the video justifies it, a like would be appreciated. Please comment down below what vehicles you'd like to see. And yeah, I will see you on the next one. Have a good day.